Now, as I quickly look at the exterior of this car, this is, like I said, a 94. It is all original paint, no accidents, no stories. They are not prone to rust. So I know you see a bunch of rusty ones now, but if you take care of them, so if you wash them, and even in this is a salt state. I'm in northern Iowa. They salt the roads here, or at least this car is in northern Iowa, I should say. And so as long as you wash it and you properly protect your paint and whatnot, and that, I would say the regimen for that, for me, typically even includes, I remove the lower door strip moldings, usually once a year. I'll carefully slide them off. I will clean behind there. I will put polish behind there, a little grease on the insides of the strips, and then slide them back on. Same goes for this. These front fenders are about the only place where they do rust, even on nice cars. You end up, especially if you park your car outside and your cowl area gets full of leaves, it is really important to keep that cleared out. So get a leaf blower or something and blow in the edges and blow any kind of crap out of there, because if you get water that overflows in there, you can obviously overflow your heater box. You can get water inside. You can get water, places where you don't want water, obviously. But also, you want to make sure that things drain out down here. And when you get leaves up in these corners, they can fall down in there and they can get stuck in there. And you'll see there's a little hole here. So I will, whenever I wash a car, I'll take a good jet of water and I'll really blast in there to make sure I'm getting the crud out. And I will, when I'm changing over in the spring or fall, I should say, twice a year, I change summer and winter wheels on this because it does get driven in the winter. And I will often pop this wheel liner out and then get behind it and clean it really good. And then I use like a wax product. I will actually put a link in the description for that. But I spray that really good, get cleaned up, and protect it for the winter months. Kind of same goes, door moldings. Inside here, obviously all the door jambs. Anytime I wash this car, they get cleaned and dried. And obviously the leather, use frequent cleaning and conditioning. Traditionally, I've used Lexol on everything. But this being a 94, it's the only year that has the external antenna. So this is a powered antenna. Most of the rest of them have a antenna in the front glass. So make sure if your windshield has been replaced, make sure you still have the little antenna in the glass. And I'll show you here on the 93. Maybe we can see it. But there's a little strip. You can see it right there as it goes through. That is your FM antenna. And there's actually a dual diversity antenna in these cars. So if you put an aftermarket radio in these, you will get garbage reception unless you actually get an adapter that connects to both of the antennas. And the rear, I believe, is amplified. So you're actually going to want that to connect to your remote on for an amp, so that it powers that antenna, and then you're good to go. So this car actually has a Y adapter, hooks up to both antennas. They are powered, and as a result, I get really good HD radio reception, which if you don't do that, you will get good reception if you're within a block of the transmitter. So pretty bad. So keep that in mind on the 93 versus the 94. This one obviously has the stock amber corners because we decided to keep this car all stock. The stock Fuchs alloys, which are forged and weigh about 16.5 pounds per wheel without the tire, obviously. So these are actually a well-loved wheel option for these cars. They ride good. It does wonders for the suspension. Anytime you can have less unsprung weight, the better. So I know a lot of people like big boat anchor wheels because they look good, but they honestly kill the driving experience on a lot of these. Other than that, this one's stock exhaust. They sound a little bit like a Singer sewing machine. These emblems will fade. There is a individual that makes a sticker that will actually go over that and restore it, or I actually tape around the edges and I hand paint them and restore them again. So one issue this car does have on one side is you can see the headrest is splitting. That is a common thing on especially these loop headrests, especially in the rear where they get a lot of sun. And this car does not have any window tint on it, so it's even worse. But I do have a spare headrest for this, so I can fix that easy enough. The other thing to be aware of, obviously paint on old cars. On the Pearl cars, you have what's called, I call it crazing, but it's minute little cracking within and this car has not been washed, so I apologize for the dirt here, but there's, if you can see it, there's just a little bit of, it looks like cracking. It's basically cracking of the clear coat. And they're really prone on the Pearl cars that sit out in the sun a lot. You'll get it on the roof, you'll get it here. And if you catch it early enough where it's not totally decimated by it, you can actually machine polish out some of that, and then I go back and ceramic coat everything. So I have done a little bit of that on this. I think you saw a previous video where I had done this back corner because I noticed there was some deterioration over here, and it actually looks pretty good now that it's done. So the key is to get it as soon as you see that, take care of it as best you can. I guess worst case scenario, you can do some wet sanding and take a layer, but you got to be really careful. And I would not encourage you, if you've never done that sort of thing, it's probably not something you want to jump into. But if you're experienced, see what you can do, see if you can save the factory paint. But yeah, this car, US car, has the G60 brakes. These are aftermarket rotors. They're drilled and slotted, and the calipers have been painted red. That is POR 15 caliper paint, and the point of that was simply to preserve them, actually, more so than to look sporty or whatever. But especially in the rears, if you have good clean working calipers, put a good coat of like POR 15 all over them, including the return springs for the e-brakes, and they will last you far longer. I did that on my red car, and they actually lasted me 20 years in a salt-prone environment. So, and also use your e-brake. Once you have a working setup, the only time you don't want to use the e-brake is if it's freezing rain, and or raining and then gonna freeze, because then you can have it freeze up on you. But other than that, use it religiously, and use it or lose it, as they say. So this car still has all factory calipers, and they all work. So I painted these, put the red POR 15 caliper paint on them many years ago, and they are still holding up nicely, and the e-brake still works perfectly. So if you got it, use it. If not, you're gonna lose it. Okay, I'm gonna swap these cars out. We're gonna hop in the 93 now, which is a modified. So looking at the exterior of a 94 S4, you can tell it does have a pretty high ride height, especially the US spec cars. The 92 model year was actually a little bit lower here. Had lower and stiffer springs along with the rear stabilizer bar. That was actually found to be too harsh, apparently, according to US buyers in 92. I don't actually know any that thought it was too harsh. Most people ended up putting on lowering springs anyway, it seemed like. So actually finding one all stock original these days is actually kind of a challenge, but this one is it's a 1994, purchased from the original owner, and it had around 47,000 miles on it when we got it. Currently has 123, but it was a car out of predominantly from South Carolina, and so it's, despite being here in the Midwest, it is actually a pretty clean car. And I can show you the only modifications on this car. Just a minute. Are some boost hoses. So we changed out the took the factory boost, the 3 boost hoses, so lower intercooler, bottom of the turbo there, and the intake. And then we also did swap over to the EFI LS ignition coil setup on this, just simply for daily reliability, and it's far easier to replace one of those than the stock system. So we did keep all of the stock ignition components. We've got all that. Can put it back to stock anytime, but for just daily driving, this is a far better solution on a modern car anyway. But this one, the only thing it's missing here is airbox cover has been removed just so it doesn't get cracked. Do still have that. And of course the tank was replaced at some point. But generally speaking, these engines are actually really quite reliable. The only things to be aware of, there was a fuel line recall and the code was KY. If your hose, and I've never seen one in the last 10 plus years, but if this hose right here is braided stainless steel, then you have the old fuel line setup on it. And you'll also see that there is a capped or crimped section of fuel line in that connector there. So dealers would often do that and run a new line over here. So that's kind of a telltale sign that you've had the recall done. Another thing, the things that fail, these actually develop tears in them as they get older. I think the factory hoses are no longer available, but you can get aftermarket solutions from 034 or 034 and to Bennett. And I will say that the 034 option, at least the prior design that I have on one of my cars, which is on this car, is a little bit too flimsy for bigger boost. I know it would actually implode a bit on my RS2 spec car. But the 2 Bennett, on the other hand, you could just about drive over those with a dump truck and they wouldn't cave in. So they are really rigid. The downside is that makes them a real pain to install because they're not very pliable. So it was a little challenge. I used a little bit of a heat gun to soften it up a bit and get it in place, and there you go. Other than that, ignition systems, most cars will be converted to a 1.0 or 1.8 or a 2.0 coil setup, or I actually do really prefer these EFI Express LS coil conversions. Literally takes 15-20 minutes to install this whole setup. Yank the factory out, put that in. The other thing to be aware of on these cars, one potential issue, the lower crank pulley, which is not really visible on this. I can maybe find a photo and insert it, but it's basically a rubber damper on the lower pulley. And I have had a failure of one of those on my other car, where the rubber bonding in the center has actually given way. So then the outer side of the pulley would kind of just could shimmy around on there, and that's obviously a bad thing. And the telltale sign of that on that particular car was you would start it and you'd hear this kind of odd kind of ringing sound, like a metallic ringing sound. Almost like if you were to take your finger around a champagne glass when it's wet and it made a little ringing. You had something of that nature, and I could tell it's coming from the front, and lo and behold, took it apart and you could just pivot that pulley around dramatically. So that's another issue. Power steering hoses are prone to leaking. If you're in the US, you can have them rebuilt by Pertec or a lot of other hose places. Just keep in mind that they are going to want to retain the restrictors that are inside these hoses. If you don't do that, you will get a big shuddering and noise as you turn towards the end of the rack and things, and you will not like it one bit. So there's also Spokane House of Hose, where you can send a hose off to be rebuilt. Have done that in the past on this car. They actually, despite having done a bunch of these, they screwed up, took out the restrictor, sent it back to us, and it was a hot mess. And so we ended up having to buy a brand new, obscenely expensive hose from Audi. And I'm not sure they're even available anymore. So be very, very certain that they retain that. Another thing, obviously, throttle cams. These factory cars have a plastic throttle cam. This is actually a metal one. I know it looks like the plastic one, but it is upgraded at this point. The factory ones get too many heat cycles in them. They're plastic, they crack, can result in the throttle sticking open, which sounds exciting, but obviously you can put the car in neutral and just turn it to accessory, coast to a stop. It's fine. You can even outbrake. I mean, your brakes are stronger than the engine, so no unintended acceleration issues here. It's just kind of an annoyance, obviously. So driving the 94 S4 down a really old and beat up road and it is surprisingly smooth. That's one advantage of the stock suspension is, yes, it may look like a Rancho suspension, but it actually rides pretty good. And so we're in second gear, 2,000 RPM. If I put my foot to the floor, it gets up. It moves all right. It's, not nearly as quick as a modified car, obviously. But the boost comes on fairly quickly for old school turbo. That's one advantage of the K24 cars. Actually do seem to they're definitely more streetable. They're good compromise between acceleration off the line, and my RS2 spec car definitely has quite a bit of lag, and so this one feels like it would beat it across an intersection. Hey everyone, thank you for watching. This previous little clip you've been watching is just a little teaser, part of a segment I shot for the upcoming Buyer's Guide video, which is coming hopefully sometime yet this spring, assuming I get good enough weather here in Minneapolis to actually, go out and shoot something that's not gloomy and rainy. So we've had just an eternal winter here this year, which is not super uncommon, but this year we had, I think it was 8 inches of snow around Easter, and then we had 3 days of beautiful sunny 80-degree weather, and then it just turned into cold and rainy, and today we actually have sunshine and 50 degrees, which is not too shabby out there. But yeah, I need some decent weather so I can actually get out and do some work, and I need to do some catch-up maintenance on the Pearl car here, and I need to get the red car out of storage and ready to go for the season as well as an update on the D2S8, which is still under a wrap in my driveway. So stay tuned for all that. I assume we will get some sunshine and decent weather at some point, and I will get caught up on all of that. But until then, I hope you enjoyed this little snip, this clip here. And also, stay tuned. I have the second installment of the virtual car show coming up. So that should come out within the next week or so, if not sooner. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.